Cerebral palsy is a disorder of movement and posture due to some problem that has affected the brain. It's an umbrella term so that there's all grades of severity and no one child with cerebral palsy is the same. Each child is very different.
It's the most common physical disability of childhood, affecting between 1 in 400 and 1 in 500 children. So we say that every 15 hours a child is born with cerebral palsy in Australia.
Will was diagnosed with cerebral palsy when he was 3 days old. So this journey for us, my family, has been right from the beginning. Will suffered a hypoxic brain injury at birth, which means that he had reduced oxygen and blood flow to his brain during birth, which affected several areas within his brain, and that was picked up on the MRI at 3 days.
Cerebral palsy is a condition that affects the developing brain, and it's caused by damage at some time, usually before the baby's born. In some rare cases it happens during delivery, and there is still a proportion that occurs following the birth.
So the known causes, it can be something early in pregnancy, such as when the brain is developing. There may be a malformation or an abnormality in the way in which the brain develops. The mother may have a virus such as cytomegalovirus or rubella that crosses to the baby. There can be problems at birth, secondary to a difficult delivery, or there can be problems even during the first year or two of life, such as a severe brain infection or a near-drowning episode.
From the time he was born, I knew straight away something wasn't right with him. If we laid him down on the floor at 3 months of age, he couldn't move his arms up to grab or reach the little things that you put over for them, the little animal things. All he could do was just kick his legs, that was it. He couldn't lift his head off the floor, he couldn't roll over, he couldn't hold a bottle. And I just knew as a mum that something wasn't right.
The main way we thought that his kidney wasn't developing was the fact that he had difficulty rolling. He also had, we expected him to be able to start to the stand, even supported standing, and he couldn't do that. Everything just seemed to be a little bit slower. We knew that he was a premature baby. We thought, well, his prem babies take longer to develop, so that's what we thought. However, when we took him to the specialist at the Royal Children's, they looked closely and gave us a diagnosis of cerebral palsy.
I looked it up on the net, and I knew that it wasn't as severe as the other forms, but then I came across the ataxic, and it was just him to a T, every symptom. I thought, oh my gosh, So I went back to the paediatric neurologist and I said, look, I've had just about enough. I said, it's been nearly 3-4 years. I said, we've gone to intervention centres, assessment centres, this centre, that centre. No one's been able to tell me anything. I said, I just remember looking at him saying, does my child have ataxic cerebral palsy? And he just looked at me and said, yes, I think he does.
We classify cerebral palsy in lots of different ways. It can be classified according to its severity, from grade 5 being the most severe to grade 1, which is the mildest. Now, also another way of describing it is to describe it according to the region of the body that's affected. So parents will hear the term quadriplegia, that's meaning that all 4 limbs are affected. Hemiplegia means half the body is affected, either the right or the left. Could be a diplegia, that means that the lower limbs are particularly targeted, though often the upper limbs are affected as well. We call most cerebral palsy, 85% will be what we call the spastic type, and that's where the tone is very high. Some types have ataxia, and that's where the movement can be quite uncontrolled. And there is a hypotonic type where the tone is low.
In Will's case, cerebral palsy affects his entire body. However, he predominantly has low muscle tone. Unlike a lot of people that have cerebral palsy have higher muscle tone, so they get a lot of muscle contractures and they're quite fixed, can be quite fixed in position. Will's the opposite end of the spectrum, so he has the potential to have a lot more movement, but he needs support to do so.
Kinnan has diplegic cerebral palsy, and so that is associated with his lower limbs, and particularly the calves and hamstrings. And all the treatment and work we do from a physical point of view are associated with work on making that muscle tone not as tight, reducing the muscle tone.
You know, I often think back to when we got his diagnosis and were told he'll never walk and he'll never talk. And that's such a black and white, clear-cut diagnosis in the beginning. Yet what I can see now is, you know, he may not talk as we talk and he may not walk as we walk, but Will and every child like him has their variation of how they do things. So often I get asked by kids, can he talk? And I'll always say, well, he can talk, but he uses his hands and he makes sounds, but it just doesn't sound like us. And it's the same with his walking. He can kind of walk if he's helped, but that's enough for him. So he's got a lot of physical challenges and they'll always be there. But we just find workarounds to try to give him the best opportunity to be involved in the world around him.
While the future is bright and hopeful for most children with cerebral palsy, for the children who have severe cerebral palsy, we must acknowledge that it is a very difficult journey.